Hey, I want to tell you a story this morning that'll make sense in terms of where we're headed. We'll get to the title in the passage in just a second. Just as a sign of how unempathetic we are as a group, and I know some of you will cringe at this, how many of you really like to watch videos of people getting hurt? Anyone else? Like fail videos, things like that, big fan? Good, I am the captain of that team. I'm number one in the fan club. In the church that I grew up in, we had Sunday morning church, Sunday night church, Wednesday night church, and my mom was on staff at the church, and I always felt like we were the last people to leave. And I know some of you, because I watch you, that your kids feel like that, and you're in the lobby for like 40 minutes, and your kids are tugging on you, things like, can we go? Can we go? Can we go? And you stay and you talk, and you stay and talk as long as you can, because your kids don't control you. They're not the boss of you. You do whatever you need to do within that. And so, but like, that's how I felt when I was a kid. And I can remember just like constantly asking my parents, like, could we just once, not be the last people out of church? Just one time. That's no fun. And it was especially important on Sunday nights, because on Sunday night, I remember when I was like 5, 6, I had an appointment that I had to keep with Bob Saget. That's right. There was no YouTube. There was no on-demand videos of people getting hurt and running into walls and any of those other things. I had to go to Bob Saget and America's Funniest Home Videos. And so I just like, our church services started at 6, it was over at 7, and Bob was on at 7:30. I was like, we gotta go. Because we'd stop by Gold Star, which was fantastic. We'd make our way home, and I had to be home in order to see Bob. And so recently I have introduced my children to fail videos. And I view it as my responsibility as a parent to orient them to people being hurt and making bad decisions. And the hard thing within it is like there's an appropriate reaction to videos of people getting hurt. It's a, oh, ah, wow, ouch. Like just like these quick one-word answers, like quick one-word responses. That's all we're looking for. And my kids feel the need to give commentary. And they're not funny. And the really hard thing within there is my kids, like, they watch these videos and they think that like, the reason why these things are happening is because the people don't realize what they should realize. Like, they want to stop and explain it, and like, someone will like, they try to like ski down a handrail down steps, and then they'll like fall and get massively hurt, or they'll try to skateboard down an escalator and smash into a wall. And then my kids will be like, they'll like pause it. Like, they'll take the remote from me, which first off, that's a big no-no. And then they'll pause it and they'll look at me like, why would they do that? Don't they know that they're going to get hurt? And I'll look at them and just like, you're ruining it. But like every single thing, it's like this idea. They almost feel like all these people, like if they just had the right information, then they would know. And these terrible things would not happen to them if they had the right information. And I was telling them, like, they know. They do it anyway for our benefit. And I'm grateful for that. That it's not about like having the right information. They have all the information that they need. You see what's happening right here. I'm taking a silly story and working it seamlessly into the message, and we're already preaching without you realizing it. Until I called it out right there. They're like, oh, the illusion failed. They have all the information they need. It's that they're not acting on the information that they need. That makes sense? We understand? All right, let's get going. Title of the message today is Follow, Fail. Follow, fail. And this is what I want you to see today. I want you to see what is happening with the decisions that you're making and why you sometimes end up in places that you don't intend on ending up. Why the destination that you arrive at is not the destination that you thought you were headed for. But even more importantly than that, I want to show you what is happening beneath the surface in the decisions that you're making. Because if you're not aware of this, you're going to think that the decisions that you make in the direction that you head is about where you end up. You're going to think your direction in life is about the destination that you arrive at. And there's actually something far more significant going on. And I want to show you that through this passage in 2 Kings chapter 17. And we're going to take this apart bit by bit. I'm going to start in verse 13 today. And it says this: again and again, the Lord had sent his prophets and seers to warn both Israel and Judah. So these are his two nations, his two chosen people. It used to be one, and now it has become two because Judah continuously does what God wants it to do, while Israel does not. And it says again and again. He's saying, I have repeatedly told you this. You are not suffering from a lack of information. You are very aware of what God is seeking for you to do. Again and again, the Lord had sent his prophets and seers to warn both Israel and Judah. Turn from all your evil ways. Obey my commands and decrees, the entire law that I commanded your ancestors to obey and that I gave you through my servants and prophets. But the Israelites would not listen. They were as stubborn as their ancestors who had refused to believe in the Lord their God. Key points. Again and again. Again and again. God sent them. But they refuse to listen. Do you ever get in that spot where you tell someone something and they're not doing it, and for some reason in your head you think, I just need to tell them again, and now they're listening, right? You ever get there? Or maybe parents with your kids, like, I've told them once, maybe I need to use my stern voice and they'll listen. Maybe I need to use my angry voice and they'll listen. Or moms, you've got this nailed. Maybe I'll use my angry voice, but not separate my mouth at all. So I say the same thing, but I say it like this. That's a lot more intimidating, I'm not gonna lie. We're all intimidated by that. I'm not saying that sarcastically, I'm letting you know legitimately. We're all intimidated by that. And we get this idea that like, if you just had more information, then you would do what you need to do. But you don't need more information because it's not a failure to know, it's a failure to follow. That's where the failure is. So a couple months ago, I was riding with my father-in-law in the car, and we had to go to a church, and it was a Sunday night, and we had a meeting at this church on a Sunday night, and I'm riding with him. And my father-in-law is very different from me when he drives. I am as attached to Google Maps as a 2-year-old is to their security blanket, okay? Like no matter where I'm going, I pull it up. My father-in-law likes the adventure. He likes to live dangerously. And so we get in the car and we've got to get to this church, and I look at him and he's driving. I'm like, do you know where you're going? And he goes, I think so. Oh. So I pull out my phone, Google the church we're going to, look up the address, get the directions. I've got the directions right here. And he goes, okay, I think I know where I'm going. And so I took the phone, and he had like a little phone holder right there, and I placed it right in front of his face. So the directions are they're right there. And there's like, we're going along, and he'll like come up to a stop sign and be like, I think I go left here. And I like look at him, and I look at the phone. You do. The blue line tells you exactly where to go. And there's this awkward dynamic going on, because if it was just my dad and he's like, I think I go left, I'd be like, look at the phone. Like just look at the phone. But there's that like awkward dynamic because he's my father-in-law. And then some of you know this, we're a Nazarene church. We're on a district, and he's our district superintendent. So I kind of got the relational authority and the professional authority dual going on while we're here. And I'm trying to when we're trying to be cautious on making suggestions to someone, you're trying to do it very courteously, and you have gone past that line where it's no longer courteous. And so he keeps going along and he keeps coming up to other intersections. He's like, I'm not sure what to do here. And at this point in time, I'm just very passive aggressively sitting next to him and staring at him. And meanwhile, the estimated time of arrival on the phone keeps going up. We had to be there at 6, and when we get in the car, that number says 5:57. And then if you're following directions, you would come up to a stop sign, stop, make the turn. But because he doesn't know where he's going, he's coming up to stop signs like this. And I'm watching that number go up, and I hate being late. With everything within me, I hate being late. I had lunch with someone this week, and I was a minute late to lunch. And I walked in, and I was like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm late. And he goes, well, how late do you have to be late? A minute. I'm late. And I did this with our staff, just because we didn't value it. We have a meeting, we have our staff chapel, it's our general staff meeting. We worship together, we have it every week at 10:41. You see what we did there? Isn't that cool? So we have it every week at 10:41, and for a while there, when we first started it, it'd be 10:40, and everyone's still in their offices. And I didn't want to be the boss and be like, hey, we're gonna be late. You're gonna be late. I don't want you to be late. So I wanted to make it a matter of identity, and so this is what I started doing. I just started walking up the hallways in our office, and I started pronouncing it like this. I go, we're early people. Come on, we are early people. That's who we are. And I'd start preaching up and down the hallways. I'd be like, we are excited about what God is gonna do. We don't wanna miss a moment. We are early people. And eventually our staff started showing up early. And then a month later, we had a meeting, and I was 5 minutes late to the meeting. And I walk in the room, and what do I hear? We're early people. Come on, we are excited about what God is gonna do. We are not late, we are early people. It's I get it. And some of you, while we're here, I just wanna let you know, we are early people, okay? Because sometimes service has started and God is here, but you are not. And we are early people. We're excited about what God is gonna do. So I'm going along with my father-in-law, and I'm watching that number tick up, little by little. And eventually we get to a spot where we stop at it. We stop at a stop sign, and we're so close, and he goes, I can't remember, it is on this block, but I can't remember if it's left or right. And I finally look at him, I said, the phone tells you everything you need to know. Go right. All you have to do is follow the phone. And so he went right, and we arrived early. Because we did what it was telling us to do. It was not a failure of having the information. All the information was right there that he would ever need. It was a failure to follow. And we understand this practically in our lives, that if I don't follow the directions and instructions, I won't end up where I want to go. But for some reason, we keep missing this spiritually. And we think that we need more information to make the right decision. And we think we need some new revelation to do the thing that we are already called to do. And we'll have a dispute with our neighbor. We'll go, what should I do? We'll go, the Bible says, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. I'm gonna pray about it. Love your neighbor. I'm gonna go ask a couple people for advice. First couple said, this is what we do when we ask for advice. We ask advice until we get the answer that we want, right? Oh, I didn't like what you said. I'm gonna get another opinion. I'm gonna keep going until someone tells me to do the thing that I already believe that I should be doing. It's not a failure of information. That's not what we're lacking in. It's a failure to follow. And when we fail to follow, for one, we will end up at a destination that we don't want to be. but something more significant will take place than even that. Because what this passage says, it says again and again, God sent his prophets and seers to tell the people this message, but they refuse to listen. And then this is what happens. Verse 17. Not verse 17, verse 15. It says they rejected his decrees and the covenant he had made with their ancestors, and they despised all his warnings. They worshiped worthless idols, so they became worthless themselves. You go, what? No, it says this. You go, okay, it's not an information fail, it's a failure to follow. And we would go, well, the failure to follow is about ending up in a destination that you don't want to be. He goes, no, it's more serious than that. It's far more significant than that. It's not simply that they ended up where they didn't want to be, it's that they became what they had no desire to be. It doesn't say they worshiped worthless idols and so he punished them. Isn't that what we think? This is what we so often think in terms of how faith works. We think that if I go the wrong direction or do the wrong thing as it comes to my morality, that God will get me, right? Say something wrong, watch out for the lightning bolt, someone step aside. Here's the reality. The consequences are built into the decision itself. You don't have to wait for God to do something. The consequences are built in. And so here's the reality that you need to know. Is some people, they'll say something like this, well, I don't want to say that. I might go to hell. I don't want to go to hell. Here's the truth. You can be in hell long before you die, right? You make enough bad decisions in a row, you'll be in hell long before you ever pass away, and that becomes your reality. It says about these people, it doesn't say they worshiped worthless idols and so they ended up where they didn't want to be. It says what you follow is not what destination you end at. It says what you follow is what you become. That who you become is about what you follow. And we don't think that. And so we're really careless about our lives. We're really careless about our decisions. And we say it like this, we do things like this, we go, well, I'm just spend hours on social media. What are we doing? We're just scrolling. We're just looking around. No, you're not just scrolling, you're becoming. You're becoming. That's what you're doing in those moments. We go, I'm just shopping online, just looking for deals. No, you're not just shopping online. You're training your brain to operate like a consumer. You're training your brain and your body to tell yourself over and over again that your worth is determined by what you have. Your worth is determined by your possessions and how good your stuff is. No, I'm not doing that. I'm just watching videos. I'm just scrolling through videos. No, you're not. You're becoming. What you follow is what you become. They worshiped worthless idols and they became worthless. It's not their destination, it's their identity that is at stake. So you ready for this? If you follow what is false, you will become fake. If you follow what is sensationalized, see Facebook news outlets that some of you need to stop sharing this moment, to be clear. If you follow, there should have been more amens. I know I put some of you on your heels, but I just want to be clear. There should have been more amens on that. If you follow what is sensationalized, you will lose your bearing on what is true. Ready? You better respond to this one, okay? If you follow what is sexualized, you will begin to see that that is where your worth comes from. That was a little too much, okay? I know. They're like, ooh, that was like, you said the S word in church. And I know that'll throw you off. It is not just about what you do, it is about what we are in proximity of, what we give our attention to. Every single one of us, you've had that friend that you become their friend and you start to pick up their language, right? You start to pick up their terminology. You may not realize that you're doing this, but you do it. My kids do this. They'll come home and they'll start saying phrases, and they're like, 8, where did you hear that? This boy in class, I will get that boy. I promise you that. No, because the people who we hang out, they shape who we're becoming. And there is a significance to your actions because it's not just about where you end up, it's about who you become. And every single one of us, we are always becoming. Every single one of us, we are always becoming. You are not static. Your life is in motion. You are being shaped. I had a friend who years ago, they got divorced after like 3 years. After like 3 years, I was like, what happened? Like, you guys were so happy. And they go, they changed. I hope, because they were kind of a jerk before. Like, I know they're a different person than the person I married. I hope we're all becoming for the better, right? And because some of you, like there's reason to celebrate because you can go within this, I'm not who I used to be. And that's a good thing. I'm not who I used to be back then. And I am grateful to God for that. But what you follow determines who you become. Let me show you this. This is what the Apostle Paul writes to the church in Rome. And so to be clear, if you want to look this up on your own, it's Romans chapter 1, verse 21. So consider this. He says this strongly in what would be the introduction of the message. So he really gets going as he gets into the middle of the book. He says this about the people. He says, yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. Look at that. He says, they had all the information they would ever need about who God is, but they failed to engage. They failed to celebrate. See, when we come together and we worship, it's not just because, like, at no point in time did our team get together and go, you know what we've realized? Our congregation, they all have beautiful voices. Every single one of them. Like, their harmonies are spot on. Like, we could just start a choir with everyone who is in the rows. And so let's spend extended time singing because their voices are so melodic and so majestic and so beautiful. Now we would, because your voices just are that great. But that wasn't the desire behind it. No. It's engaging within the declaration of who God is that changes who you are. See, let me give you a little personal confession within this, okay? I have for most of my life lived in the territory that whenever I am at an event or an experience or anything within there, I sat back with my arms crossed with this posture. Impress me. Make me laugh. Give me a reason to celebrate that I can't do anything else. And you know what I realized? Is that when I needed a reason, I rarely found it. When I waited to be impressed, I rarely was impressed. When I waited to be compelled to worship, I rarely did. And so I changed my posture. I said, I don't want to be the person who has to be like, everything has to happen perfectly for me to have a reason to celebrate God, because the reality is that's not true of our lives, is it? No. I'm gonna worship on the front end. And when I worship on the front end, what I have found is I have far more reason to celebrate God as I continue throughout my life. And so he says, no, this is the problem within there, if we can get the whole verse on the white screen. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. Now, you've done that. And I've done that. And this is what it looks like. Is you get in a situation, you get in a tough decision, and you go, I know what the Bible says, but wouldn't God want? God's got to love that when we interpret him on the things that he's already clearly said, right? I know what scripture says about this, but wouldn't God want for me? Let me fill in the gaps, because apparently God has not done a decent enough job of explaining himself and his will for my life. My kids do this to me all the time. I tell them this: no candy before lunch. No matter what, no candy before lunch. And then the worst culprit of this is the 2-year-old. And he'll sneak into the pantry, and he'll go in the pantry, and he'll shut the door behind him, and he'll get like a thing of Airheads, and then he does this. It's really sneaky. He turns the light off and sits in the pantry and eats the candy in the dark. And sometimes we'll hear him, because he doesn't understand that even though the light is off, that the sound still travels. We'll open the door and we'll see him sitting in the shadows, munching on candy, like a sociopath. We go, we said no candy before lunch. He says this: I thought you would want for me to have this. I thought you would want for me to have this. That's exactly what happens, what Paul is addressing in Rome. If I could get that thing back up there again. He says, they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. Because they failed to engage, they started going, well, God would certainly want this. And then it says this: as a result, because of their failure to worship, because of their failure to give thanks, it says, as a result, their minds became dark and confused. It wasn't an information fail, it was a follow fail. And the failure to follow shaped who they would become. And so let me declare this just on the front end, regardless of where you are and what you think about church and what you think about the stage of your life right now, okay? Our failure as a congregation will never be to thank God. Our failure as a congregation will never be to worship and celebrate who God is and what he is doing. Because we can sit back all day with good information that doesn't transform us. We can sit back all day with good information that doesn't impact who we become. And we will not be the people who fails to act, and we will not be the people who fails to give thanks. Amen? And so this is what we're gonna do right now. I wanna give you 10 seconds right now in this moment to celebrate who God is and to celebrate what he's doing in your life. Can we celebrate that right now in this moment? Don't let that be your failure. Don't let that be your failure, a failure to give thanks. So this is the piece that I love. This is a piece that I love. So when Jesus calls his first disciples, and when he calls people throughout history, he doesn't say this to them. He doesn't go, hey guys, believe in me. He doesn't say, hey, I want you to know me. Now he does want you to believe in him. He does want you to know him, but that is not his invitation. His invitation, do you know what his invitation is? What's his first invitation? Follow me. Follow me. Now, as you follow Jesus, you will know him. As you follow Jesus, you will know more about him and you will be with him. But that is not his primary goal, is for you to simply know him and for you to be with him. His ultimate goal within this is that you would be like him, is that you would become like Jesus. And so when Jesus calls Peter, he calls him like this. He says, come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people, which is the weirdest metaphor in the world, but Peter was a fisherman. And so what Jesus is saying to Peter in this moment is, I will give you a greater purpose in your life than you have ever had. I will fill your life with a greater meaning than there has ever been before, because he wants you to be like him. Not just to know him, but he wants not just that you would believe in him, but that you would become like him. When the Apostle Paul, same guy who wrote that verse in Romans, he declares to the early Christians, he tells them this, he says, follow me as I follow Christ. And you hear that and you go, wow, that sounds really like narcissistic, Paul. Like, shouldn't we just follow Jesus? This is what Paul knew. I'm becoming like Jesus. Like, as long as I'm following him, I'm becoming like him. And so as you follow me, you'll become more like Jesus, so I'm becoming like him. And if you think what I'm saying this morning is, you should follow me as I follow Christ, you've missed it. That should be what you're saying to those around you. You should be able to say, follow me because I'm following Jesus and I'm becoming more like him. And so when Jesus says these words, when he says things like, hey, I am the light of the world, we are called to hear that and think in those moments. That means that Jesus is the light that we run to, the light who illumines our path and drives out darkness. But it doesn't just stop there. It gets transitioned, because what you follow is what you become, is that you are meant to be a light. You are meant to be. When Jesus says these words and he says, I am the bread of life. I am the one who is nourishing, who will sustain you. That's a good thing, right? You want people in your life who are nourishing and will sustain you. He doesn't say, I am the Twizzlers of life. I taste nice for a moment, but you will run out of energy in a hurry and then have a sugar crash. And some of you have those people in your life, and some of you have become those people because you weren't careful about who you're following. He says, I am the bread of life, that you are meant to be nourishing to those around you. When he says, I am the good shepherd, he says, I am kind and caring, and that is what you are meant to become. When he says, I am the resurrection and the life, it's not just a statement of what is offered to you, but of who you are called to become. That you are meant to be that for those around you. That you are meant to be their source of hope as you follow Christ within there. And so his statement within there is, he says, follow me, become, not just believe, not just know, not just be with, but become like me. And so this is what I want to show you. Is so often we talk about our salvation simply in context of what we believe, which is accurate, right? Your forgiveness of your sins, your right relationship with God is not dependent upon your actions, your victories, or your failures. It's dependent upon your belief. But your formation of who you become is dependent upon what you do, and more importantly, who you follow. Let me break this down, because there's two ideas that are so important here that I want you to see. This is what it says in verse 17. The impact of those around them. It says, they even sacrificed their own sons and daughters in the fire. They consulted fortune tellers and practiced sorcery and sold themselves to evil, arousing the Lord's anger. Pause right back on that first part. You would go, isn't that a bit much? Like, they sacrificed their own sons and daughters in the fire? And we would go, we wouldn't do that, right? Turn to your neighbor and say, we wouldn't do that. And yet this culture of competition that we've created for our kids within sports and academics, is it not similar to that? Because we're afraid that some other parent is pushing their kid a little harder and a little further, that our kid's gonna get behind, and so we do not what is best for them, but to make sure that they would keep up in those moments. Sounds pretty similar. And then he continues. He says, because the Lord was very angry with Israel, he swept them away from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah remained in the land. But even the people of Judah refused to obey the commands of the Lord their God, for they followed the evil practices that Israel had introduced. It says this one nation, they had the intention of doing what they were supposed to do, but because they surrounded themselves with those who were not, they still failed to obey. I don't know if you've ever heard this. I think this thing is fascinating. Have you ever heard this idea that you are the average of the 5 people who you spend the most time with? Have you ever heard that before? It's this idea that, like, you are your personality, your likes, your interests is the average of the 5 people who you spend the most time with. Some of you, that's a terrifying statement right there, and you're like, oh, I need new friends. No, this idea, they've actually like tracked it back to like your income. Your income is the average of the 5 people who you spend the most time with. And you're going, I need richer friends right now. Some of you make appointments right now. You can go out to lunch afterwards with people who look rich. But they found that it's actually deeper than that. Let me show it to you like this. So let's say this is you. And these are the 5 people who you spend the most time with. This is the clearest way that they found it, is when it comes to your fitness level and your weight. So ready? So if one of the 5 people who you spend the most time with gains weight, you are 50% more likely to gain weight. That their change in eating patterns and nutrition habits makes you 50% more likely to gain weight. And we would go, yeah, that would kind of make sense, because I have never at any point in my life had someone go, hey, you want to get ice cream? And me be like, no, I don't need ice cream. It's like, I could have just had ice cream. You want to go get ice cream? Yeah, I could eat. Let's do it. But this is what's crazy. Okay, so we get that on the 5 people who we spend the most time with. But what about their 5 people? So let's say this guy, that his circle of the 5 people that they spend the most time with, if this person right here, who you don't know, so they are a friend of a friend who you may have heard of, but other than that, has no relationship with you. If this person gains weight, you are 20% more likely to gain weight. Ready? Let's take it out one step further. Let's look at their network. If this person right here gains weight, and you don't know this person, and you don't know this person, so we're talking about a friend of a friend of a friend who you have no idea who they are. If they gain weight, you are 10% more likely to gain weight, even if you don't know the 2 people in between. So imagine what would happen if your friend gains weight, if their friend gains weight, and their friend gains weight. From Jesus to Jabba the Hutt, and back to Jesus in just a little bit, okay? Take Jabba away, otherwise I can't focus. This is so powerful. Ready? So look at it like this. If we would just say this, if a friend of a friend is happy, if they're happy, which is what the subtle thing that we're all after that we would never state, we're not often would say, hey, I'm looking for purpose, I'm looking for meaning, I'm working for what's right. We're actually often pursuing happiness, and we need a better goal within there. But if this person is happy, you are 6% more likely to be happy. Even if you don't know this person at all, you are 6% more likely to be happy. This is what studies have found. If you got a $10,000 raise, you're only 2% more likely to be happy. And now some of you look at that and you hear the statistics and you go, yeah, but I'd still like an opportunity to see if that would work out. That the people who we surround ourselves with shape who we become. And I don't think anyone has figured this out nearly as well as social media. Because if you go into the newer social media networks, it used to be you had a friend or you would connect, and we have updated the language because they know what's really happening. You follow. I'm not friends, I follow. I'm following this individual. And I think there should be a feature there that if you don't have enough mutual friends, they could just call it what it really is, stalk. But right now it says, no, I follow. And so a number of years ago, I had this pastor who I followed. And his church was a little bit bigger than mine, and it was a little further along than mine. It wasn't actually Kevin Bacon. That's just up there for your enjoyment. No, but I followed him. And as I followed him, it was like every single time something good was happening in my life, something slightly better was happening in his. And so we were like a young church. We had like 200 people at the time, and we'd have Easter, and there'd be like 500 people there for Easter. And like our team, our church was like, we're so like, this is amazing. That many people came in. And then he'd post like 2 days later, awesome, God is moving. We had 1,000 people for Easter. Are you kidding? And this is how I felt. I felt like his name, I'm not gonna share his name, I felt like his name was Slightly Better Pastor Than Kevin. And it was like every single time he'd post, every single time he had something, it was always a little better than mine. And he'd like post pictures of his family. His family like all perfectly posed and everybody's smiling. And my kids are hiding in the pantry eating Airheads. I was just like, what is this? And then I realized this, okay? I realized what I was doing. And it wasn't his fault, okay? So I'm not gonna blame him, okay? It was my issue. And I realized that his posts were a trigger for me because I was constantly in this gauge of comparing myself to him. And I wasn't just seeing what he was doing. Every single time that was happening, it was setting me in this spiral of comparing myself. And I realized I wasn't actually following him. This is what I was following. The feeling that I was inadequate. And every single time he'd post, it'd remind me, I'm not as good as him. Every single time he'd post, it'd remind me, I'm not as smart as him. Every single time he'd post, I think I'm not as good a parent as him. Granted, he had 2 kids, I had 4, so I was mismatched, but that's another story for another day. And I realized what I was following is I wasn't following him. What it was creating within me, because what you follow is what you become, was a feeling that I was not enough. And so I had this brilliant insight. And this insight, I assure you, is worth the cost of admission today, which was free. As I realized this, it was this button right here. And I could do this on social media, but I also realized that I could do this with all of my life. That it wasn't just a social media thing, that I could choose who I followed. And if I follow determines what I become, then I must be really, really mindful of what I'm following. And so I realized that I've got this button right here, and I could just unfollow. Let me go back because I don't think you got it, because this is really good. Ready? Bring it back. This right here, this idea that I'm not worthy, that I'm not enough, and this thing that was the trigger, not his fault, it was my trigger within there, and this constant reminder that I was not enough, that the issue was that I was following it. And so I could just unfollow, and I didn't have to do it anymore. That I choose who I follow. I am choosing who I am becoming within that. And so let's get our list up there. Because if we actually looked at the things that most of us are following, it's creating within us what should never be within us. That for some of us, you have been following comparison for far too long. And comparison will do one thing more than anything else. It will steal your joy. It will give you the feeling that your life is not good enough and that you don't measure up. And so church, let's do this. Let's make this decision. We've got that button. Let's make a decision that we are gonna unfollow comparison in this moment. For some of us, we've been following perfection, and perfection is the enemy of your progress. And so let's make a call today that we are gonna unfollow perfection, that doesn't have to be in our lives. For some of us, you have lived for years in shame, and you have been given this mentality that your worth and your value is defined by your worst mistakes and your worst day. And I want you to know that your value has nothing to do with what you have done, but everything to do with what God has done for you and who He created you to be. And so here's our call. Ready? Here's our call. Shame, we're gonna unfollow shame. Fear, we're gonna unfollow fear. Come on with me. Shallowness, we're gonna unfollow shallowness. Worry, we're gonna unfollow worry. Cynicism, we're gonna unfollow cynicism, because that's not the people that we have been created to be. Church, if you would, stand to your feet. If you don't become the person who you desire to become, It is not a failure of information, it is a failure to follow. And you choose who you follow. And in so doing, you choose who you become. I remember years ago, I was watching an award show, and Matthew McConaughey won an award. And he got up there to give his speech. Some of you said, all right in your heads. That's fine, we'll keep moving. And he got up there at the end to give his speech. And as he's giving his speech and going through stuff, he says that you always have to have someone who you're pursuing. You always have to have someone who you're chasing after. And then he said this, I'm chasing after me 10 years from now. I am my own role model. I am the person who I am seeking to become. And I thought, what a small life. Like, what a shallow life when the biggest expander of your imagination is who you will become yourself. That God created you for a bigger life than that. God created you for a more significant life than that. And if you want a bigger life, don't follow you, follow Jesus. Because you were meant to be like him. You were meant to become like him. So this is what I want to invite you to do now in this moment. It starts here with a confession that you are not the Lord of your life, but that God is. And that you want to be like him, not just know him, not just be with him, but that you want to be like him. In the book of Romans, it says that if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord and God raised him from the grave, that you will be saved. That is the salvation of belief, and then you must make the decision to follow, because our formation is about what we do. But I want to invite you right now, if you have never made that decision to place Jesus at the center of your life and the Lord of your heart, to repeat after me in just a moment a prayer that we're going to pray. And if you'd like to make that decision right now, I invite you to do it boldly and courageously. And all those around you who have already made this decision are going to pray this prayer with you. And so I invite you, if you would like to make that decision in this moment, repeat after me. Lord, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Savior of the world, that he was raised from the dead to forgive my sins. I receive your grace. By faith, come into my life. I will follow you. Amen. Amen. Hey, let's celebrate that together today. Let's lift this up of the one who we're following and the one who we praise.